And welcome to the Correspondents. On this edition, President Obama vows to close the prison in Guantanamo Bay again. But is Congress willing to bring enemy combatants onto U.S. soil? Apple doubles down and refuses an order to unlock an iPhone used by a shooter in a deadly mass attack in California. And Hollywood celebrates the best in film at the Academy Awards, but critics say Oscar didn't get the memo on diversity. Hello, I'm Mil Arcega, and this is the Correspondents on Voice of America. Well, U.S. President Barack Obama says he plans to make good on an old campaign promise to shut down the military detention center at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. But the president's plan also means transferring most of the remaining prisoners to the U.S., something many in the Republican-led Congress say is never going to happen. VOA's Carla Babb has more.
When it becomes clear that something is not working as intended, when it does not advance our security, we have to change course.
President Obama Tuesday urged Congress to close the American prison in Guantanamo Bay and sent a plan to Congress outlining the steps to do so.
Clear!
He said that past claims of torture at the facility have been used as a terror recruitment tool. Islamic State victims have been paraded around in orange jumpsuits, similar to those worn by Guantanamo prison detainees.
For many years, it's been clear that the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay does not advance our national security. It undermines it.
The pushback from Congress was immediate.
So we'll review President Obama's plan, but since it includes bringing dangerous terrorists to facilities in U.S. communities, he should know that the bipartisan will of Congress has already been expressed against that proposal.
And joining me now to talk about the president's plan to close Gitmo, VOA Pentagon correspondent Carla Babb, who prepared that report for us, joins us. And also in our studio, national security correspondent Jeff Selden. Welcome to both of you. Well, Carla, it seems like this proposal, the president's proposal, is dead in the water even before it gets to Congress. Why so much pushback from Congress?
Well, a lot of congressmen and women are saying, not in my backyard am I going to host a terrorist. They just don't want to have terrorists detained in their communities, and therefore they're supporting other senators, congressmen, governors that say, I don't want it in my facility either. So that's been the biggest problem. There's another problem with the trials. President Obama mentioned that he would like to have these alleged terrorists tried in federal courts. And if that were to happen, right now the military could go to a detainee tomorrow if they got new information on the war against terrorists abroad and say, well, hey, what do you know about this? Once these detainees are tried, they're either going to be convicted or they're going to be released, but the military won't have that same opportunity to go to them as they would. And so a lot of congressmen say we don't want that to happen because we are still in a war against terror.
Jeff, is that greater legal access that enemy combatants would actually have if they were situated in the United States? Is that part of the argument against putting them on U.S. soil?
Well, obviously, when you have somebody who's been taken from the battlefield as a detainee, whether they were fighting for the Taliban, fighting for al-Qaeda, fighting with the Islamic State, though none of the folks at Guantanamo were with the Islamic State, since that's much newer. But when you get somebody from the battlefield, the emphasis always is get as much information from them as you can. That's what intelligence officials want to do, see what they know, and then see how you can use that. And so there's always a fear from the intelligence side of the argument that losing connectivity to these detainees, to somebody who's been involved with a terrorist network, could cost you down the line. You want to be able to ask them what you want to be able to ask them when you want to be able to do it. And so there's always that fear. On the flip side, though, what a lot of officials have made and what the administration pushes as part of its case is that a facility like Guantanamo Bay is now backfiring, that it's giving the terrorists motivation. It's giving them a recruiting tool and helping, as Carla pointed out in her report, with how many of the Islamic State prisoners are paraded around in jumpsuits that look like the ones from Guantanamo Bay. So they're saying that's not a good idea, and that the availability, the ease of the access, as opposed to being able to ask them questions whenever you want, it's just not worth it.
There are now, Carla, fewer inmates held in Guantanamo Bay than at the peak in 2000.
Absolutely. There's less than 100 now. There's 91. And here's the problem. It cost $450 million last year, and there's only 91 detainees. So President Obama has said that the plan will save between $60 and $85 million a year. That's $1.7 billion, he says, over 20 years if the facility was moved to the United States.
So what would be the advantage of keeping them in Guantanamo Bay, Jeff?
Well, the administration says that there's not a lot of advantage. Obviously, the concern is these are people who were working with terrorist groups, had designs on either hurting the West or carrying out plotting attacks specifically against the United States. You don't want them in the general prison population. You don't want them released anywhere in the world where they can resume and pick up those plans. But what the administration says, they point to a report that's released once every 6 months by the Director of National Intelligence, and they say when you release these guys, even with the deals that have been made where people have been sent to other countries, the rate of re-engagement is much lower than it had been under the previous administration. And the latest report from the Office of Director of National Intelligence said the confirmed rate of re-engagement prior to January 2009 was 17.9%, almost 18%. But that since then, with the new rules, the new precautions that this administration has taken, that the rate of re-engagement has dropped to 4.9%.
But how do you prevent re-engagement, Jeff? I mean, do you just keep them in your prisons longer, or you just don't release them? Or?
These are for folks who have been released. So what the administration is doing, what the Pentagon, Secretary of State, they work all these deals, and so that when detainees released to a certain country, there are rules that these detainees have to follow. They are watched. They are kept under observation by the country to which they're going. And through a variety of those types of means, they're prevented, even if they try, from re-engaging, from contacting other terrorists, from joining other groups. But it came up earlier this week when Secretary Kerry was testifying before lawmakers. He was asked about one detainee transfer in particular who had re-engaged and appeared in a video for al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, to which Secretary Kerry responded, that's not supposed to happen, adding that there would be some consequences.
So speaking about not in my backyard, has the president actually proposed any locations where he might put some of these Guantanamo Bay inmates?
He has. The plan that was put forward to Congress actually mentions 13 locations, but none of them by name, because the military says that it wants to work with Congress to find the best locations. These locations range from anywhere between a maximum security prison, federal prison, to one that would be on a base, to even building one on a military base in the United States. We do know, even though none were mentioned by name, we do know that they have done site surveys in Kansas, in South Carolina, and in Colorado. So those are
and we're getting
some
pushback already from some of those, some of the governors in those states, correct?
Yes, and even as the number of detainees is getting smaller and smaller. You know, there are 91 detainees now, but as Jeff was mentioning about the transfers, there are 35 detainees that are eligible for transfer, and the United States is working with other countries right now to try to find out where to place these detainees. I had a U.S. official that told me they're looking to get these 35 out to other countries by this summer. And then in addition to that, there are 10 that are somewhere in that military commissions process that could become eligible for transfer in the future. But that's still leaving about 46 that we don't know where they're going to go.
Jeff, one of the big concerns is that when you place these detainees in U.S. soil, you put people, Americans, in danger. Is that necessarily true, or is that just a political argument? We're not safe if we put them here.
Well, it depends how you release them. I think anybody would have to admit that if a detainee was released into the general population in the United States, that would be a huge concern.
That's not what we're talking about.
But in terms of the prisons, it depends how. It depends what restrictions. Are they in isolation? Are they in some sort of maximum, what type of access do they have to the other inmates? It's always a concern, and it's been a concern in many countries, the ability of terror groups to recruit within prison systems. Indonesia, which recently had a big terrorist attack, that's something that they've been grappling with. How do they prevent groups like al-Qaeda, Islamic State, from going into the prisons and recruiting more prisoners? So that would be a concern.
But U.S. maximum security prisons are secure enough, to handle even the most dangerous. Is something like this likely to happen, though, in an election year, Carla, very quickly?
It looks like it's not going to happen, especially during an election year. But President Obama has pointed out that there have been several terrorists that have been tried in federal courts and placed in prisons, and they've been secure. You know, we look at the Boston Marathon bomber. We also look at the shoe bomber. So there have been examples of this that the president is pointing to. But again, it's an election year, so it doesn't look likely.
It's a very frustrating situation when you can't get anything done because it's 2016. Thank you so much, Carla and Jeff. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America. When we come back, we'll talk about issues of privacy versus security and what iPhone maker Apple has to say about all that.
Where does the Zika virus come from and how many people around the world are affected? I am Dr. Ruiz. The Zika virus is an emerging mosquito-borne virus, and the World Health Organization has declared the Zika epidemic a global emergency. Over 20 countries have reported the disease, and there is no cure. Among the symptoms are fever, rash, and redness of the eyes. Anyone with symptoms should get plenty of rest, drink fluids, and treat symptoms with over-the-counter medicines. Learn the facts about Zika. Education is your first line of defense.
VOA, telling America's story for more than 70 years.
The voice speaking from America and the war.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech.
Close the waters.
In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth.
And welcome back to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, Apple says it is not backing down from the latest court order that forces the company to unlock the contents of an iPhone that was used by one of the shooters involved in the San Bernardino, California mass killing back in December. Apple executive Tim Cook says the FBI is asking for what amounts to a backdoor that would allow the government and perhaps even hackers to get around the company's security measures. But U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says there is precedent for what the government is asking Apple to do.
It's a long-standing principle in our justice system that if an independent judge finds reason to believe that a certain item contains evidence of a crime, then that judge can authorize the government to conduct a limited search for that evidence. And if the government needs the assistance of third parties to ensure that the search is actually conducted, judges all over the country and on the Supreme Court have said that those parties must assist if it is reasonably within their power to do so.
So, who's right, Apple or the U.S. government? Well, to help us answer those questions and sort through all the details, I'm joined by Doug Bernard, who writes about privacy and technology issues for VOA. And joining us again for this segment, VOA security correspondent Jeff Selden. Thank you both for being here. Doug, let me ask you the first question. It seems like a reasonable enough request. Help us unlock this phone. Why is Apple so adamant about not taking part in this FBI request?
Well, a reasonable request, at least from the perspective of the FBI. A chilling request, at least from Apple CEO Tim Cook. The basics of what's going on here. Apple has in its, the FBI has in its possession a phone that was allegedly used by Syed Farouk.
Okay.
They want to take a look inside, but they can't because it's locked. Now, they have asked a judge, and the judge has in turn ordered Apple to help them get into that phone. It seems
Why can't they just get the pass, use a brute force attack, and get those that phone opened up?
Because in 2014, Apple wanted out of the "I'm unlocking your phone" business, so they made encryption standard on all their phones, and they included another feature called auto erase. Basically, if you enter 10 passcodes that are incorrect, all of the data on that phone is irretrievably destroyed.
You lose all that information.
It's all gone.
Wow. So Jeff, let me ask you this: couldn't the FBI, get much of this information that they're looking for, phone records, logs, that sort of thing, from the phone companies themselves?
Well, in terms of tracing calls, who did Farouk talk to, when, stuff like that, that you could probably get through the phone companies. But they're looking for something a little bit more here. They're looking for whatever type of information, whatever plans, whatever he may have done, the type of stuff that anybody would store on their smartphone. And that's, as anybody with a smartphone knows, that's a whole lot of different types of data, contacts. You can do planning, calendar events. you name it, photos. You can put almost anything on a smartphone these days. So it's much broader what they're potentially looking for. And that's the problem. That's not something that you can just get from tracing who called who when, which you could probably get through the phone company.
But if I may, there's a conundrum here, which is the presumption is if the phone is simply unlocked, then the FBI will be able to learn whatever they want. That, in fact, may not be the case at all, because you have to anticipate a lot of the apps on that phone are encrypted as well. So you unlock one door only to find a room full of locked other doors.
So the concern here, Doug, though, is that we're not just unlocking one phone. We're actually potentially unlocking all the phones in the universe.
Well, that's what Tim Cook says. The FBI disagrees. They say this is a one-time deal only, and once it's done, we'll give you the software back. No harm, no foul. Apple is very concerned, one, that this patch, in effect, a firmware patch, would get out somehow, either through the FBI or maybe through third party conducting analysis on it to make sure that it really does what they say it does. So Apple is saying this isn't just a key into a terrorist's phone, it's a key into everybody's iPhone.
So it leaves us all open to security. Jeff, I'm wondering, what impact would a court ruling here demanding that Apple actually help the law enforcement to unlock that phone, what impact that might have on terror groups? Are they watching a case like this closely?
Obviously, with the savvy that many groups have used to approach technology, manipulate technology for their own benefit, they'll be watching this and they'll be looking. From a law enforcement, from an intelligence perspective, it's also a big deal, and they're watching it just as closely, and they're just as interested, because intelligence personnel, law enforcement personnel, they're taking a different approach. They're not looking at the privacy issues so much, but they're looking, and earlier this week, the FBI director was testifying before a House panel, and he said the way he looks at it is, yeah, more privacy, that's great. But what about finding that kid who may have been kidnapped? What about protecting that one person who may be in danger? What about cracking that case that is really important? And if we don't, then other people could get hurt. And that's how they're approaching it. And what they, at least publicly, are saying is they want some middle ground. They want to find a way to get what they need, because they also know that privacy is important. And the more they weaken security and privacy for these devices so that they can get into it, the more the devices they use can become vulnerable to the same things. So it's a double-edged sword, but their main goal is they want to solve the case, they want to crack the code, they want to get the bad guy, and for them, as they say, that's the overriding concern.
Doug, if this were a Hollywood movie, I mean, they would have cracked this phone. They would have cracked this phone in 10 seconds. Is there actually a difference between iPhone encryption and say, BlackBerry, which touts itself as one of the most secure phones, or even the Android phone?
Absolutely. In fact, I would imagine if this were an Android phone that the FBI had recovered, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now, because I think it's much more likely the FBI...
That's not a very good selling point for Android.
No, but you have to bet that right now engineers both at Apple and the Google, Android IS operating system, they're looking at ways to make their phones more secure and even more uncrackable.
And it's interesting, too, because a lot of the companies like Microsoft, another big company, and usually a rival with Apple, they've already talked about filing briefs on behalf of Apple. So you have the tech industry, despite some discussions with the government, now forming a coalition behind Apple to prevent this from happening.
Now, here's a question for both of you in the amount of time we have. Should consumers be willing to give up a little bit of privacy for the sake of the greater good?
Well, I think part of the problem is very often we apply this frame, privacy versus security. It's very often how this and other similar matters are discussed. That may not be the very best frame. I mean, that's kind of an intractable problem. That goes to tensions that are at the heart of our Constitution. So I think what may actually be happening quietly behind the scenes right now are people are going to try to find ways to apply a different frame, a different way of looking at this problem to actually find some solution.
So, Jeff, last question here. If Apple continues to refuse to comply with this order, what kind of a penalty could they possibly get? What recourse does the government have?
Well, there are two things that are happening. One, this is going to move through the court systems, and there's some expectation that it could go all the way to the Supreme Court. But the other thing that's been happening, and you hear this both from the FBI in this case and from Apple, asking Congress to start weighing in, because both sides are saying this type of technology wasn't envisioned when the laws were made. We need a new approach, and they want the people to weigh in.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug and Jeff, for that very interesting discussion on consumer privacy. We do want to know what you think about that. Should the government have access to your phone in cases of national security? Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. Stay tuned. When we come back, a look at Hollywood's best, according to the Academy.
For comprehensive 2016 U.S. presidential election reporting, turn to the source you trust most. Voice of America's USA Votes coverage. Only on VOA.
How do you see the world?
I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
Hamilton Live is a live audience performance. With live music, you have that interaction. There's nothing like getting that immediate feedback from the folks that you're performing to. They feel it and they respond back to you. You see it in their eyes. You know that you're connecting with them. Like if any form of communication, it's that response that you get back.
And welcome back to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you love movies? Well, who doesn't, right? After all, movies have the power to entertain, to educate, and even to move us. But it takes a lot of people to make a really good film. So every year, Hollywood holds a big awards party to celebrate itself and, of course, the people who come together to make all those movies. Their achievements are, of course, symbolized by that golden icon of Hollywood, the Oscar. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences hosting its 88th Academy Award ceremony on Sunday to honor the films, the actors, the directors, and everyone who made the movies we loved in 2015. It's a big, glitzy red carpet affair, as you know, that brings movie stars and all the people behind the scenes together for a night of glamour and entertainment. There were a lot of great films in 2015. I'm sure you've seen quite a few of them, but very few people, let me tell you, have seen as many, I believe, as our very own entertainment reporter, Penelope Pallou, who rubbed elbows this year with some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. It's got to be an awful job, Penelope, but somebody's got to do it, right?
Somebody's got to do it. What can I say, Mil?
I'm so glad you're here. There were a lot of great films to talk about in 2015, but before we even get there, I want to talk about the big elephant in the room and the fact that this year's Oscar nominees do not contain a single ethnic minority or a black actor, producer, director. How can that happen in a place as progressive and as liberal as Hollywood?
First of all, let me clarify one thing. Alejandro Iñárritu, for all intents and purposes, is a minority.
But he won last year.
And he will win probably this year, too.
Oh, my goodness.
But moving into the main issue, which is about the black minority and other minorities, the issue is not with the Academy. It is not that the Academy members are racist. It has to do with the marketplace. It has to do with what selections do big studios make, what films to invest on to make, because of their audiences.
Are you, in effect, sort of blaming the consumers for this? Is
Yes.
that the kinds of films that we want?
Yeah, in a sense, I do. And in a sense, it's also a phenomenon of our Western civilization. If you go to Bollywood, you're going to see different type of films, and maybe they have their own choices and preferences. But when you have big studios, especially in this country, investing hundreds of millions of dollars for a film to show in a theater, and when the theaters have to make their selections, which movies to showcase based on the tickets they're going to sell, they are very skittish as to what scripts and casting they're going to choose.
I didn't really want to spend too much time on this, but I did read somewhere that in China the marketing is different. If you have a black star in a movie, you take him out of the poster. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, there are shades of gray, if you will. I mean, we can talk about racism in a different country, I don't know. But we can also talk in this country about market considerations. I am not so much talking as to whether people are going to take a black person out of a poster in this country, for example, but I'm sure studio executives will be concerned how their movie does abroad, because that adds to their international box office. So it is part of it.
So how did movies do last year? You watched quite a few films, and I know you make an annual prediction. Last year you were bang on perfect. What movie really made an impression on you this year?
Well, there are two films that I like the most. The one is The Revenant, which I am rooting for, I have to say. Leonardo DiCaprio, I believe, will be the big selection this year.
That's nominated for quite a number of awards, right?
Absolutely.
So you think it's going to win for Best Actor?
Best Actor, I'm hoping Best Picture, I'm hoping Best Cinematography. Really? And although I root for Spotlight again, also for Best Director.
Spotlight.
I do too. But if you look into the volume of work that went into The Revenant, it's a matter of balance, a balancing act.
The cinematography, the acting was just superb.
They filmed in natural light, sub-zero temperatures. They had rehearsed and choreographed every single sequence in that film that looks so surreal and so spontaneous.
And a lot of that was filmed in Bragg Creek, very close to where I grew up.
Yes, so I know.
Yeah, so I love the scenery. What about Best Actress?
Best Actress is a relative unknown, although she has a lot under her belt. We don't know her. Her name is Brie Larson. She gave a tour de force performance in a small film called The Room.
What is that film about?
It is about an abducted young woman who is raped by her abductor and gives birth to a boy whom she raises in a shack. And, you know, the first 5 years of that boy's life is in that shack. That boy doesn't know anything else about the world until they manage to escape. And then the movie evolves into even a deeper context of what is the better world, out there or inside that shelter?
It was a
shack?
very moving picture. I have to admit, it's one of my favorites. I thought the boy's acting was just absolutely
Superb.
As honest as it can be, and it was really a story about why life is such a wonderful thing.
And I think, in a sense, to be honest, that when there's an organic relationship between two actors, helping one actor get a nomination, the other actor should have been recognized too. And in that case, I feel the little boy should have gotten a nomination, but he didn't.
So the Revenant's director, Inarritu, you think is going to win again also for director? What do you think?
I believe so. I believe that he will win the Oscar. I believe that Lubetsky, the cinematographer, will win the Oscar. And I am hoping for Spotlight, too, which I'm hoping at least that they will give...
It's a favorite of many journalist friends that I've spoken with. It sort of brings back the reasons why we get into this business.
It's very intelligently done. The plot, you know, builds very, very tensely, and it's in a very taut way. So that is wonderful. But it's dealing with very stiff competition from
What about
the
Bridge of Spies? I mean, that's the big Hollywood blockbuster, supposedly, but it hasn't received as big a buzz as many had expected it would.
I believe Bridge of Spies would have gotten a much better recognition if it had been made in the 90s. I believe it's a film that belongs to the 90s with this high-minded American idealism and how America comes to save the world. And there's a lot of cynicism and mistrust today regarding international politics. And also, we have grown as audience. We want more texture and nuanced stories.
But it might get a nod for a supporting actor, right?
It might get a nod for Mike Rylance, who was excellent. But again, he is facing competition from Mark Ruffalo of Spotlight, who is delivering a beautiful message, from Tom Hardy at The Revenant, who is incredibly rough and visceral, and from my least favorite, but a popular icon, Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah, who could actually win? A lot of people are thinking perhaps it's his time.
No comment.
No comment. No, there is an awful lot of competition. So if, for people who have not seen a good movie, what would you recommend for them to watch this weekend?
Well, it depends what kind of movies one likes. You know, if you cannot stomach DiCaprio eating raw liver, and he is eating it for real, then don't see The Revenant. But for me, when I saw The Revenant, I remember I came to work the next day and I said, thank God, the Oscars is saved.
We'll be watching. Make sure you catch a good film this weekend. Thank you so much, Penelope. We're out of time, but we'll be back again next week for another edition of The Correspondents. I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, stay up to date with the latest news from around the world at voanews.com. You can catch any episode of our show right there. Just click on the Programs tab on the upper right. I'm Mil Arcega. For now, so long from Washington.